All right, welcome to WatchTalk. I'm very excited to have a very nice conversation today with Kevin. For those who don't know you, can you maybe introduce yourself?
My name is Kevin Odell. I'm a watch collector from the United States. I live just west of Washington, D.C. I've been collecting watches for around 20 years now. And on Instagram, I am at They Did, TheydID.
Very nice to have you. Let's start off with the most important question is what are you wearing today?
Okay, so yeah, you told me to pick some watches to talk about today. And so I didn't want to pick too many. So I initially picked four plus what's on my wrist. And then last minute, I grabbed one more and put it in here. So I have six watches total today, and then one wild card. But what I'm wearing on my wrist is a vintage Abercrombie and Fitch chronograph from the 1930s. It is in solid 14 karat rose gold. It's an Angelus caliber 210, and it was retailed by Abercrombie and Fitch. It has Breguet numerals. It has a double scale, so it has a telemeter scale on the outside and then a tachymeter scale on the inside. But the tachymeter scale is ghosted, so you can only see it at certain angles. It also has a hinged case back, so you can pop it open and view the movement easily, and then snap it closed again.
That's
Um,
really,
so it's a cool, unique, rare watch from the 1930s.
do you wear it often? Or you just picked it for this talk?
Well, yeah, you told me to kind of pick stuff that was interesting. And so, I went through my safe and I tried to find some stuff that I felt like um nobody else is gonna have. So that was kind of, I'm like, well, I only want to pick four or five watches. So if I'm gonna do that, I want to kind of showcase watches that I think are really cool, really special, and that probably the people listening or watching aren't going to see ever again. Um, the only theme that I followed was all the watches today that I brought are all gold, because your handle on Instagram is dresswatches.nl. And so when I think of a dress watch, it has to be precious metal and typically yellow metal, rose gold, yellow gold. That's what I think of when I think of a dress watch. And I don't really dress um like I dress very casually, so I don't really dress up. I don't really wear suits unless it's a special occasion. I never wear a tie. I rarely ever wear a button-up shirt. Um, I'm a very casual dresser, but I actually wear dress watches pretty much on a daily basis. I wear, a Cartier tank, uh, something around a Cartier tank almost every day for the last, 4 or 5 years. And of course, I have some stainless steel pieces as well, but those seem to be kind of my go-to watches, even with my casual dress. So I think, you know, um, people out there who are like, well, I have no use for a dress watch because I work from home and I rarely go out. I don't see that as an excuse. I think a nice classic dress watch can be paired with anything, especially if you put it with like a suede strap or a more casual strap instead of like a exotic crocodile or alligator. I never wear exotic skin straps. Typically, I'm wearing a suede, calf, Epsom, or pigskin is my favorite strap. So, I think you can kind of wear whatever with whatever as long as you're confident.
I agree. I think people make too much of a big deal out of it. Like you said, I'm very much into dress watches. Even in end of high school and student years, like even if I would not dress up so much, I always wore like dress watches. I think one of the watches I wore the most back then was Blanc Penfilet, the basic one, the Ultra Plate from like the
Mm-hmm.
90s. Very thin, yellow gold, 34 millimeters. Nothing wrong with it. I think, especially nowadays, there's no real rules in that sense that people have to stick to strictly, I think.
Yeah, the Blancpain Villereys are amazing watches, by the way. Anybody out there that's watching this and they, watches are very expensive now, and it's very stressful now to just go out and try out a new watch. And but I would say, without hesitation, look at the Blancpain Villereys, particularly the ones from the early to mid 90s, the 34 millimeters. They have a stepped bezel. That's beautiful. The cases wear wonderfully. They have 19 millimeter lugs, but they're compact, but they don't wear tiny, and they're very high quality. A lot of people don't realize that Blancpain was actually a brand owned by Frederic Piguet, well, Jacques Piguet, but the
Hmm.
Frederic Piguet company. So, the movements in them are very, very nice. I'm not sure if yours was an automatic one.
No, it was a manual bound one.
Manual wine, even better. I love the manual wines. They had really beautiful movements, really elegant, classic, timeless, everyday watches. I just picked one up this week myself. I haven't gotten it yet, but it's one that I've been after for quite a while. And I have a few in my personal collection as well. I didn't bring any to share today, but because I want all mine are stainless steel. I wanted to stay like kind of in this kind of more elegant, more kind of rare and quirky fashion, but love those watches. Pretty cool that you were wearing one of those at such an early age, because that's, in my view, a
Hmm.
very sophisticated watch.
I think I was drawn to dress watches from the beginning. It's just, I don't know, I really like classical art in general. I grew up, my mother is like an opera singer. So I grew up around classical art. So I guess I got inspired by that. I always watched like watches as an expression of art. And I'm curious when you talk about the Blancpain watches. I also used to have like the chronograph, the 1185, the column wheel vertical clutch chronograph.
Mm-hmm.
They're also, I think, very nice. They're extremely thin. I think they were for a few years actually the thinnest automatic chronographs at the time. What do you think about those?
Yeah, I mean that's actually, I did just pick up an 1185.
Ah,
They also made the split seconds
yeah.
1186, which is amazing. And I, in my personal collection, have one of the um, prototype 1181s, which is it's a manual wind split seconds with no date and no seconds. Apparently, they came out with that watch in 1989. They developed the movement in 1988. At the time, it was the thinnest split seconds chronograph. Um, it wasn't until Patek Philippe came out with the 5959 that was no longer the thinnest split seconds chronograph. But apparently in that period, everybody wanted an automatic watch. Manual wind was not really in vogue at the time, and everybody wanted a date on their watch. So the watch, even though they made a few pieces, it didn't get ordered. It was in the catalog that no dealers wanted to stock it. So what they did is they took the base 1181, they added a rotor, they added a seconds hand, and then they added a date at 6 o'clock. So instead of being a 2 register chronograph, it's now a 3 register, and one of them displays seconds. Super super cool pieces. I love all of them. Ben from Watch Brothers London just posted an amazing one in gold with a blue dial. That watch is one of the nicest watches that I saw this week for sure. Um, although a collected man posted that amazing Lang and Heine
Mhm.
piece unique today that was just blew me away. So, a lot of great stuff being posted all the time. But unlike that, Lang and Heine piece unique with the, has a Conrad base, but it's a jumping seconds. In platinum, that watch is $70,000. You know, Even that watch that Ben posted, it's under 20 grand. And for how rare it is, and for having a split seconds chronograph in solid gold, I mean, that watch retailed back in the 90s for almost 40 grand. So really, really great value proposition these Blancpains pose.
I agree. I think that's always been, especially because from a relatively early age, I got into watches. I always was looking at what, with my limited budget, what kind of nice watches can I buy? So I think that's what I carried over until now. So maybe it's nice before we talk about the watches that you brought. If you could you tell me a little bit how you got into watch collecting? What started the spark for you?
So I kind of have a unique story with how I got into watches because growing up I had no interest in watches whatsoever. I was big into skateboarding and music, and I worked doing media stuff, so videography, photography, editing, stuff like that, and that's what I had figured was going to be my career and going to be kind of my path in life. But as uh, as things sort of started to happen, when I got out of high school, I was working as a videographer and editor for a company. The company that I worked for, the owner wanted to retire, and therefore I was out of a full time job. I was laid off, and I could only find freelance work. And so, because of that, I my dad was a goldsmith, and so he did a lot of repairs for local jewelers and ring sizing, stone settings, custom work, stuff like that. And he did that from our house. So my dad had offered to get me a job at one of the jewelers that he did repairs for, in the intermediate until I found another full time video job. And so I went to work at a kind of like a pawn shop. They had a jewelry department, and they sold watches in that jewelry department. And because my dad's background, that's where they threw me when I got the job. And so I had to learn about diamonds, jewelry, and watches. And one of my jobs, which ended up being a really fun kind of challenge, was when people would bring in a watch to us, we had to determine if it was real or if it was fake. And so, that meant taking the watch apart. It meant inspecting the movement. And then when you inspect those watches, I felt like, wow, like I had no idea that watches were still made with moving parts and that, there was this artistry to it. I just thought a high-end watch was just for like a rich flex, a rich person to flex. And since I wasn't wealthy, I had no, want or desire to flex wealth. So, I mean, I kind of looked at it the same as like a BMW or Mercedes, right? Nice car, but they do the same thing as a Honda or a Toyota. They get you from point A to point B. And so I just assumed that a Rolex was the same thing as any other watch, just a higher name brand.
No worries.
So, anyways, once I was in, kind of having to view watches in that capacity where I was having to authenticate them, I couldn't help but have an appreciation for the real ones. It was really exciting. Um, and that's how, I think I was very knowledgeable about watches from the beginning because it was part of my job description was to learn, um, authenticate, verify originality. And with anything that I get into, you know, um, I really go deep into it, and so I remember back then, like, if there was something about a watch that I saw at work that day and I wanted to learn more about it when I got home at night, I would go on the internet and I would go on watch forums and I would ask questions. I would share photos, and I started going to get-togethers. And back then, there weren't really young people in watches. I was in my early 20s, and there was nobody else my age that was into watches back then. And so everybody there was like my dad's age or older. And so it was, you know,
What time around was this? How long ago?
this would have been around 2002,
Mhm.
2003, in that range. So like about 20 years ago. Um, and yeah, I mean that's kind of how I got into it. And I started off just buying one watch a year. I started off with like a Movado Gentry chronograph, which is like a quartz watch. And then got an Omega Seamaster, and then a Rolex, and then that's when I started diving into some of the other brands that at the time, uh, watch collecting was not big. It wasn't a thing. People knew what Rolex was, and they knew what Omega was, and they knew what Cartier was. But I started getting into things like IWC, JJ LeCoultre, and Panerai. I really got into Panerai in my early 20s. Really loved the history, and being a younger guy, I also just liked, to this day, I still like that kind of design, that kind of beauty and simplicity, right? Just hours and minutes, or hours, minutes, seconds, very clean dial. And then back then, being like a young kind of like active guy, like I liked the robustness and the modesty, humbleness of a Panerai. No one knew what it was. You could beat it up. And the history was really cool. And so that was kind of the first watch that I really dove into the history of. And after learning everything about Panerai, then I moved on to kind of another brand. And then as I started to, evolve as a watch collector and as a person, right? I mean, I'm going from my early 20s. I get married when I was 23. And then by the time I'm 28, I'm now having my first child, right? And so a lot of things were changing in my life. And so that's kind of when I started getting into vintage. Um, and so I got into vintage around then, around age 28, and kind of just fell in love with that, because I always liked like rare stuff, like my whole thing about collecting watches was kind of having stuff that nobody really knew what it was, um, except a very small group of people. And I never wanted to show up into um, like a watch get together with the same watch as everybody else. I always wanted to have something different, something kind of off the beaten path. And so you could really go deep in a vintage, especially at that time. And with vintage back then, it was very inexpensive. So I could buy and try out a lot of different watches and figure out what my taste really was. And so I did just that. And I kind of found a few brands that I felt were underrated, that I felt were sort of unsung heroes of the vintage era. I found that my favorite um, watches were from the 1930s through the 1950s, um, and sort of developed my style and my taste from there. And I still like modern watches, um, although I don't know that there's too much interesting stuff going on in the watch world today. By the majority of brands seem to play it really safe.
Mhm.
They seem to be living off of their heritage instead of, you know, um, coming out with something new and inspiring. And it's tough. There are some independents. I think the German watchmaking is very compelling, but otherwise, I think most of what you see today is pretty, I don't know, pretty boring, in the modern world, aside from a few outliers. And then of course, independents that you have no chance of even getting, maybe if you wait 5 to 10 years for a piece and fork out 50 to $100,000. Um, but yeah, so vintage kind of still is my favorite because I see a lot of value in vintage pieces because they are the originals.
Mhm.
Um, and there's only so many of them out there. So the value to me is there.
I think also then when these watches were created, the necessity was different. So the purpose of the watch and the way it was constructed is very different from a watch now, which is like for most people it's jewelry. There's no real practical utility to it, like it used to be before, let's say, the quartz period. But I'm interested. You said that this changed for you when you got married, you got children. How did that make you more into vintage watches?
I don't know. I can't say. There was a few things also. There was another thing that I actually I had struggled with my weight my entire life. I was always overweight growing up. And I think by my late 20s, I just had enough of being unhealthy, feeling like crap. And so I made a drastic change in my lifestyle. I started eating healthy. I started exercising almost daily, and I dropped 100 pounds in 10 months.
Wow.
Uh, which, like I said, when I get into something, I get really into
You
it.
could.
And so, and so, my wrist also shrunk a lot.
Mm.
So my wrist shrunk about an inch in diameter. And so the watches that I had enjoyed before now looked ridiculous on my wrist. I'm not very tall. I'm only 5'7", so I'm not a very tall guy. But I was big, and now I was short and small. So, but I think I just was getting older. You get older, your taste changes. And I think I just felt older because, I was now married for many years, you know, um, ran businesses, involved in my careers, and was about to become a father. And it wasn't like a conscious thing. I wasn't like, oh, I'm getting older, I need to start getting into vintage watches. It just so happened that happened around the same time. And looking back, I think that it was just these big changes in my life sort of altered the way that I looked at everything. And I think it just was part of my journey. And of course, a few years later, maybe a year or two later, vintage watches became really popular. I mean, Hodinkee came around just after that, and the Eric Wins of the world, his Bring a Loop thing was really big. And I was Eric and I were friends back then, and I remember Adam and I were good friends. Adam from Menta Watches. He was into modern watches like me, and we both kind of started getting into vintage around the same time. And both kind of became fathers around the same time too. So it was, kind of an interesting just move. But I'm still into it to this day, and it's been 11 years now, because I'll be 40 in January. So this was around between age 28 and 29 is when I started making this transition to vintage.
It's like for me, like I'm 26, for example. I recently got married a few months ago. For me, it's fun to hear about this. I think when I started, also I only I guess to a more limited amount. I've seen like the vintage watch space like change a lot. How do you look at where it's at today? How it's like changed over the last decade, and maybe some good things, some bad things. What are your thoughts?
Whew, well, I don't want to be too negative. Um, Unfortunately, I don't see too many good changes. I think everything has just gotten worse. Um, and maybe that's just because like money got involved. I think a lot of speculators got involved as well. People who weren't really in it for the watches, they were in it for investing. I think they can really muddy the waters for everybody. I think, you know, back then, I mean, Adam from Menta would stock stuff like this Abercrombie and Fitch chronograph often. I mean, very rare, unique, cool chronographs and time only pieces from these periods, and they'd be sort of one of a kind, and people would really be like, wow, that's really cool, and they wouldn't question. I wonder what that's going to I wonder what that's going to be worth in 2 years. I wonder if that's going to go up or go down. It was just, I think that's a really cool watch, and I want to buy it, and I want to add it to my collection because it speaks to me. You really don't see that anymore. You see a lot more speculation. You see a lot more taste that's being based on investment. Um, and of course, you're seeing a lot of watches that are being messed with, because people are like, well, if I can do this and do that to a watch and kind of deceive somebody, I can kind of get over on somebody because there's money in it now. Back then there wasn't. So there was no reason to, you know, um, do like a clever refinish or clever relooming or, recutting a case. That stuff didn't really exist back then because there's no reason for it. And so much has changed in such a short amount of time. I mean, people don't even realize that, back when I was in the business 20 years ago, you couldn't sell a watch unless it was polished. I mean, you had to polish it to sell it. Nobody would buy a beat up, scratched up watch. It didn't, it, it wasn't even fathomable. So, the fact that nowadays people are like, oh, well, if it's been polished, I don't want it anymore. It's sort of ridiculous because for all the years previous leading up to this moment, polishing a watch helped the value of the watch, And so I think people's standards now are a little bit too high. I think their expectations are a little bit too high. These watches are old. And because of those high standards and high expectations, because of the investment initiative, there is now this whole reason for faking things. Because if people just accepted watches as they were, polished or otherwise, then there would be no point in recutting the case. And I mean, they even these days will recut a case and then scratch it up and make it look like a true unpolished watch. They wouldn't cleverly refinish dials. They wouldn't, do like clever relooming because nobody would care. People would accept the watch for as it is. And of course, the all original pieces that were in really great condition would always sell at a premium, but there would still be a market for these sort of lesser pieces or even like off brands. Nowadays, if it's like, back then, if it was an anonymous watch or an off-brand watch, people would still buy it because like it's still a cool watch. Now you see a lot less people doing that because people don't want to take a risk. And by risk, you're assuming that, well, your whole point in buying it is because of an investment, not because you like it and not because you love it. And I'm not saying like, you shouldn't be cautious about how you spend your money, and you shouldn't, be concerned about like, price at all, because at the end of the day, these, watches are expensive. They cost thousands of dollars and in a lot of cases. And so you should be concerned, but if it's a pie chart, the investment part should be a smaller slice of the pie than every other reason why you're buying that watch. I mean, it's always going to be there, but I think now it's too much. So that's a little bit disappointing to me. I'm often very disappointed in, I mean, I scold people. If you follow me, I mean, I scold people all the time for their just outright, in my opinion, stupidity. And, I've always just bought what I liked. And because of that, I've been ahead of a lot of the trends, right? But trends come and go, and if you love the watch, it doesn't matter if it's in trend or not. You're going to enjoy it regardless. I was enjoying my Cartier watches back in 2016 and 2017 when no one cared and you could buy any Cartier watch for $3,000. And I'm going to be enjoying them 5 years from now. And it's like, same thing with my IWCs, my vintage Movados, my Reversos, all that stuff. If it goes up in value, of course, that's a win-win. But if it doesn't mean I love the watch any less. And you shouldn't either. And if you see something out there and you're like, wow, that's a really good value, listen to your instincts. Mm-hmm. If you think, wow, that's a lot of watch for the money, then it's a no-brainer. You should buy it. You know what I mean? Like,
I agree.
It's crazy.
That's also what I do, I guess. And I think you could say, I agree with what you just said. I think it's been too much about hype over substance. It's too much about financial gain. I do think that for people, the opportunity it creates is, like, let's say you want to look at less common brands. Let's say if you go out of Patek or Rolex or Omega or Cartier, there is still like some value if you like a watch, like you said. Like for me, for example, I like Movado, Eterna, Enicar, Zodiac. I think these are a few brands. Longines, Jaeger-LeCoultre, where there are still quite a few cases. There's like a lot of cool stories that are untold, but you need to find, you need to look for it. And with what you said, with people now being more tricky, it can be very difficult, especially if you don't have if it's not your profession.
Yeah, I mean, look, some of the brands you just named are criminally undervalued and underrated. Jaeger-LeCoultre is probably the most important watchmaker of last century. I mean, it's just a fact. They made base calibers for pretty much everybody. I mean, it's asinine and embarrassing how slept on they are as a brand. Anacar, amazing watches. And they had a little bump at one point in time, but now, everybody's off that and on to the next thing. And it kind of bums me out how, you know, a brand will have a sort of bump, and then when that bump sort of withdraws a little bit, well, now the watch, they're tarnished in some way.
Mhm.
That's silly. If it's a great watch at one point in time, it's a great watch at all. If it's already determined to be a great watch, it's always a great watch. Just because the value might come down 10, 15, 20% doesn't mean the watch is any less, you know? But, people are like, oh, even though I love that watch, I don't want to buy it now because nobody cares about them anymore. That's all the more reason for you to buy them right now because you get it for a better deal.
Yes.
I see like Universal Geneve's coming down from their high. And I mean, it's undeniable that they made some of the greatest watches in the 50s through the 1960s. I mean, the Tri Compacts, as an example, it's one of the coolest watches made in the 60s. I mean, a sports watch with a full calendar and a moon phase, that's that's a really compelling watch. I see the Big Eyes, not my favorite piece, but a very cool piece nonetheless. They're trading now for like half what they were at the high. This is like a huge discount. And to think that a watch that rare and that, obviously quality is not going to rebound again, and it's only going to be higher next time than it was this time around. I mean, why people aren't, why there isn't a sustainable market for these at all times, and why everybody goes towards one thing at one time is really puzzling to me.
I think it's
But that,
part of the Instagram culture, right? Where people follow and they, like you said yourself, they're influenced. But I think it's
yep.
the funny thing about Universal Genève. Like I want to show you what I have. It's not a three compact, sadly, but like I bought this watch from the early 70s. It has, I don't know if you can see it correctly. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Very thin watch. I bought this one also with the female version for my wife. I found it on like the Dutch eBay for what, maybe 300 euros combined. Beautiful, like all original, even original strap, original everything. Really beautiful, and something you don't see very often with the Chinese markers.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's so many cool stories and so many different brands. I agree with you. I think Universal F kind of suffered from the pole router success. That this was like what got hyped up so much that now when they act to the next thing, like other watches, like also even like let's say White Shadows or whatnot, are they're all very slept on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you can say a lot for a lot of these brands. And and a lot of it is sort of understanding. I understand, but it just kind of is weird to me how everybody just is. We're all different people, right? We're all individuals, and why we all have to like the same watch at the same time is really weird to me. I just don't understand it. And I'm sort of like the opposite. If everybody kind of likes something, then it makes it less appealing to me. But so I really don't understand that kind of culture, that like sort of sheepish nature. But it just is what it is. And on some level, we're gonna have to level with ourselves and just admit that we're sort of controlled by the algorithm at this point. And I don't think people would really be happy to admit that. So, maybe you should check yourself a little bit and, you know, um, really kind of question, but also people just like reinforcement, right? They're like, oh, I like that. And everybody else likes it. And
Of
okay,
course.
now I feel forced in my decision. So on some level, I get it, but it's a little frustrating. So to me, things have changed a lot because people used to there used to be some like more genuine excitement about watches, and now, um, you know, uh, just seems like there's less. Um, genuine excitement about the watches. Um, so there's genuine excitement about like if there's a good auction and good results, but not like the watches themselves, which is sort of frustrating to me, and annoying. But
I agree.
you know,
But do you have any advice for, let's say, some watch enthusiasts who now are listening and they're thinking, maybe it applies a little bit to me. I want to look where maybe I don't know so much. What kind of vintage brands should people look into? Not because you say or I say, because they should explore themselves, but there are some really nice watches maybe to be discovered.
I mean, a lot of the brands you mentioned earlier are good ones to look at. Um, I mean, for me, it's it's hard to say. I mean, I really still think like the early IWC Calatrava style watches from the late 30s and early 40s are excellent. They are, 99% the quality of a Patek Philippe from the same era and a fraction of the price. Their movements back then were incredible. The caliber 83, caliber 89, incredible movements.
I agree. I have my wedding watch is a caliber 88, so it's with the small seconds. That's
Yep.
the
So caliber 88 was a predecessor. Yeah. And then there's, or excuse me, not a predecessor. It came after.
yeah, the small second version. This is the one my wedding watch. I agree.
Yep.
That's very beautiful.
Beautiful piece. Yeah. That came after the caliber 83. And then there was the caliber 61, which came prior to the 89. And they're great. They're great pieces. They offer a lot of value. I think there's still a lot of value in the early Movados, especially the time only ones. If you can find ones with Bourgel cases, really high quality watches, really beautiful watches. They made a lot of watches with Breguet numerals. I know the chronographs, the M90s and M95s they've gone up in value as they should because they're great watches. But even, but those are also very compelling. I've been talking about Boucheron now for about 2 years. I think Boucheron, for all those people who are interested in vintage Cartier is very expensive and very hard to come by. So Boucheron also very hard to come by, but not very expensive, and all the quality of a vintage Cartier. Perhaps not as iconic of a design, but I would say a bit more of an ambitious of a design, and I would say perhaps higher quality in the finishing of the cases and the dials. Um, and so I think those are really compelling. But there's so much stuff. I mean, just open your eyes. It's out there and you'll see it, look at the movements too, because what you'll realize is that a lot of these brands use the same base movements as each other. And so you can say, hey, well, I really like this watch with the same base movement as this watch. This seems to be really undervalued. I mean, those Blancpains are a really, really good example of a watch, but this is what happens. There's a cycle with watches. They're undervalued, underappreciated, then they're overvalued and overappreciated. And then it's almost like they're spit out after that, and then it's on to the next. And that's really a shame. Me being a big Cartier guy, and being one for a long time, it worries me, because I really like that brand, and I don't want to see them spit out the way that Universal Geneve and Hoyer and Anacar and all these other brands before them were just spit out. Because the hype was over, they milked it as much as they could, and now it's on to the next. Really don't want to see that happen with any brand, because you're minimizing something that is internally special, whether you appreciate it or not.
Yes, I do think we all, like, both from the standpoint from the brands, from the collectors, from also the watch media, we kind of have like a collective responsibility to be, I guess, real and be fair with all these different kind of brands and histories, and maybe treat it a little bit more less commercial, I guess, and more like enthusiasts.
Yeah, I mean that's how I try to be with my Instagram. That's how I've always tried to be. Sometimes I'm too honest. But I would rather be, I mean, I'm not gonna self-censor, like I think that's kind of maybe what sets me apart from everybody else is that um I don't mind like being a little bit harsh if I have to. And if you don't like it and you don't want to follow me anymore, that's fine. But I can tell you that, you know, um I try to share watches that I feel are rare and special. And when I sell watches, um, I try to, treat everybody how I would want to be treated because I'm a collector myself too. And so, you know, um, I've had a lot of experience buying, not only selling watches over the last decade, but buying watches over the last 2 decades. And so I've picked up along the way what is good and what's a good experience, what's a bad experience. And so I've tried to implement all the good experiences into the way that I conduct myself. Um, but yeah, it's a weird thing with social media because I think you've got brands like Hodinkee and Revolution, and um, they bring us the news and information of the watch world, but they are essentially arms of the brands that they are reporting on because they're funded by those brands via advertising dollars, maybe special collaborations, special dinners, maybe free trips, stuff like that, perks. And so they can't really be honest, can they? They can't really be objective because they don't want to turn that spout of money flow in off. And same thing with collectors. They don't want to stir the pot because maybe it means they're not going to get allocated that watch that they really want, or maybe it means that they're not going to get that piece unique that they applied for. Um, and I'm sure I've hindered my chances on some of that stuff with the things that I've said and been critical of, but I think it's important for somebody to do it. And they can't stop me from buying vintage. So yeah,
That's true. I think it's
I,
important to remember. I agree with you. Integrity is important. I think in general in life, also in outside of watches, in general in business, in private life. I I think let's say you really want to buy a watch, like we've discussed now. There's so many cool watches out there. Let's say the cost of not getting this one watch, but having your integrity, and then being able to buy other cool watches. I think it's a fair price to pay.
yeah, for sure. For sure.
I'm also excited. Can you like tell me which watches you brought? I'm very curious.
So, so I brought a few watches in this case here. I think there's five in here. Is there four or five? Five. So two of them happen to be running, which is annoying to me. But let's see here. Because I'll show you all of them at first, and then we'll move on to one at a time. All right. So, and I tried to bring an eclectic bunch of watches because I didn't want to be showing the same thing over and over and over again because I'm the kind of person that when I like something, I buy multiples of it. Um, I'm a hoarder in that way. But I tried to bring a different, like, eclectic group of watches. Let me take them out of this box here. So these are the five pieces that I brought today. So starting right here, we have a Movado M95 chronograph in solid 14 karat gold with a unique retailer signature on the front, which we'll get into in a minute. The next one is a Boucheron. It's an oval watch in solid gold with a gold dial with an ebony bezel. It's made of ebony wood.
Really cool.
I had to bring a Cartier. And so because I wanted to bring a Cartier, it had to be a very rare and unique one. And so I brought the Cartier Reverso from the 1970s. And this one has the brushed gilt dial, which is very rare. And then here I mentioned before, IWC This is an IWC caliber 83 from the late 1930s in solid gold with a sector dial with Breguet numerals. And then over here, we have a Gerald Genta piece that was made for Van Cleef and Arpels. It's made of 18 karat gold with tortoise shell, exotic wood dial that's been lacquered, and it's an automatic movement. So, oh, and it has a tiger's eye crown. So a lot of really cool details. And most of the watches on this here, I think are a really great value to this day, with exception of the Cartier is very, very rare and expensive watch. Although I will say, comparatively speaking, the Reversos, given how rare they are, have not received the same love and enthusiasm as the classic shapes like the Normal and the Cintre and all that. So, in fact, you could make the case that this is still a pretty undervalued watch for Cartier, given how short the production was and how few of them they made and how cool it is. But it's certainly the most valuable watch on this tray right here. But again, all of these being solid gold. So yeah, if you want, I can go through each one individually.
Please do. I think that's some very unique watches, so it's exciting to get into them.
Cool. So we'll start out with this Movado. And again, this is a Movado M95. This is, again, a solid 14 karat gold case. It was made for the United States market. And it was made for a retailer in Detroit called Wright K & Co. Wright K & Co. was a jeweler in Detroit. They actually owned a building in downtown Detroit, Michigan, which is still there to this day. And it's called even though Wright K & Co. is out of business, it's still called the Wright K building. It was actually the first building in the state to have an elevator. And they did a lot of silverware, jewelry, all different kinds of things. But they were also a Movado dealer. And what I really love about this watch is the patina on the dial. And it has a very beautiful, warm patina on the dial. And, a lot of times people these days kind of shy away from patina because it's not perfect. It's not mint. But to me, a watch with beautiful, even patina is even better than one in mint condition because it's truly unique. This one has red accents. So the outer minute track has red numerals. And then the chrono hand, as well as the two chronograph hands on the dial are red, and then the second hand is blued. It's a Bourgel case, Talbert and Phil's Francois Bourgel case. So it's very robust, very nice, and it has a really, really charming and lovely engraving on the case back. I love hand engravings personally. They add provenance to the watch. They give you a glimpse into the history of the watch. And so I personally really love them. This one reads, to Richard from Vivian, 8452. So this watch from the early 1950s, heavy solid gold, beautiful chronograph, 35 millimeters. I absolutely love it. I love the Wright K & Co signature on the dial. And I love all the little details about it, from the crown to the dial to the faceted lugs to the stepped bezel, everything. Just kind of a perfect vintage chronograph. Never seen another one.
I think they, from what I see of these kind of watches, I think they kind of have like a balance between some, you could say, nuance from all these little details. They are still very classic, but they are a little bit more, I will not say sporty because they're not sporty, but they have more presence than traditional dress watches in a sense. So I think for a lot of people, like I'm not one of them. I really like very simple dress watches, but a lot of people, they need something more to get excited. I think this is a good example of that.
Absolutely. I mean, with the applied Breguet numerals, And the gold case, it's a hefty gold case. So I can see what you mean by sporty. It's more of a professional wristwatch made for a purpose. Obviously made for timing with the 3 register chronograph. Um, but yeah, super, super cool watch. Absolutely love these. I have a big collection of these. And this is the one that I picked to share because I think it's the most unique of the ones that I own, especially in solid gold. And
Do
of
you ever
course,
use it for timing or not?
huh?
Do you ever use it for timing?
No, never. Honestly, like I rarely even wind my watches or set the time. I just wear them, enjoy them. They're like pieces of art, I just like to look at them. And if I'm traveling and stuff, that's when I'll kind of set the time. But day to day, I just really enjoy them as they are. I consider myself like a steward of a piece of history. And so I try to keep them in the best original condition that I possibly can. And so the less wear and tear that I can put on them, the better. That's kind of how I look at it. Everybody's different, but um, that's kind of how I look at it. Moving on to the next one. Um, this is a brand that I mentioned before, and this is Boucheron. Boucheron was a jeweler out of Paris, France, and they made very unique watches. This one probably from the late 1960s, early 70s, although it's kind of impossible to really date them to an exact date. Um, but given the design and given the dial, I would say late 60s, early 70s. And this watch is constructed of solid 18 karat gold. Even the dial is solid gold. The hands are also solid gold. Has the original strap and buckle,
Really cool.
also solid gold. Um, but the bezel of the watch is actually made of ebony wood. So it's a very, very dark brown, black wood with grain texture. And then the dial is vertically brushed. Time only watch, manually wound, very unique and very beautiful. Um, I absolutely love it. So,
Do they make
um,
a lot of these more daring designs? Like, I am not that familiar with Boucheron, to be honest with you. So for me, it like has a it has like a kind of a 70s vibe to it, with a little bit more out there. But is this something that there are a lot of these kind of unique designs that they make?
yeah, I mean, I think all the Boucheron watches are pretty unique looking. I mean, they had certain models. You'll see a lot of the reflets. That's one model that they had. They had another one which we call a carré, which is a square model. Some of them with hobnail cases with matching hobnail dials. Some of them with like a tapestry dial with a tapestry style case. All different kinds of finishings, hammered, brushed. Um, Very, very cool. These ones with the various exotic bezels, I've seen ebony. I own two ebony ones, one in yellow gold, one in white gold, and then I have one with tortoise shell. And then I've also seen one with acacia wood. Um, but yeah, they're just so cool. They wear so cool on the wrist, and they're not really like anything else. And they're so plain. It's so basic. It's just hours and minutes, you know. Um, I love it. I love this watch. I think Boucheron is like um very underappreciated brand, especially with the you know, the high demand for another Parisian jeweler known as Cartier. I think Boucheron is very compelling. So,
Is there
you know,
something people that want maybe to get into Boucheron that they need to look out for or need to know beforehand?
no, I mean, because right now, I mean, the prices are still relatively cheap, so there's not really a reason to mess with them. And the way they're made, they're kind of made one piece at a time, like a piece of jewelry. You know, I would definitely seek out ones that haven't been over polished because they have hand engravings in them. And if the hand engravings are gone, then to me that would be a shame. It doesn't have to be unpolished, but you don't want it to be over polished to the point where you can't see those beautiful hand engravings anymore, because um, the hand engravings are kind of what make them special in my view. Um,
That makes
so
sense.
moving on to the next one, another Parisian jeweler, much more famous, which is Cartier. So this one is the Reverso, and they made two Reversos in this. Well, actually, they made three. They made a lady size, a men's size. This is the men's size, and then they made a dual time. The dual time one is kind of like the Grail. I don't have one of those. I would love one though. The dual time has a crown at the top and a crown at the bottom, and each side has a different dial, so you can display two time zones.
Really
This is a regular Reverso, so you flip it over, and it's just a solid back like the original JJ Lecoultre Reversos. This one made in France. Um, it kind of looks like just like a tank R&D because it's very thin. Kind of just looks like a tank R&D with the rounded lugs. But then it almost doesn't even look like a Reverso when you look at it. It just looks like a regular watch, but it does flip, which is really cool. And then what makes this one really special is that brushed gilt dial. Again, just hours and minutes. French hallmarks. Edmund Yeager case. Beautiful bulbous cabochon crown. Blued hands. Just a kind of a classic looking Cartier, but a unique reference. These Reversos.
the devil's in the details. I really like this. I've never seen one in person. I think they're also not talked about um, much, at least that I'm aware of. I think it's really cool. And I agree that unlike Reversos, you don't really see that it's a Reverso.
Yeah, it's hard to tell just by looking at it, but that's a super cool piece. So the next one I brought is this IWC. This is a very unique IWC. It's in almost new old stock condition. And this is solid gold. It's a 33 millimeter case, but it has quite long lugs. So it wears more like a 34 millimeter watch, but it has a beautiful two-toned lemon colored sector dial, and the numerals displayed, the 12, 3, and 9 are Breguet numerals, and they're applied. It has seconds at 6 o'clock. It's a caliber 83 movement. And it has these really cool daggered hands to it. It wears perfectly. I mean, in reality, it's just a perfect watch. I love all the different details of this watch because I love sector dials. I love Breguet numerals, and I love time only pieces. So this one just kind of checks all the boxes for me.
It's incredible.
um,
It's also really like my kind of watch. That's why like I said, why I took my also like the vintage IWC as my wedding watch. I think they are very beautiful. If you like the art of simplicity, I think these kind of watches are it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Especially from this period, I think late 30s, early 40s is kind of as good as it gets for IWC. But they did make really beautiful watches through the 1950s. The automatic movements that came out in the 50s, the caliber 852 and 853, excellent movements, automatic movements, and beautiful timeless pieces. So let's see. The last one I have is probably maybe the most funky of the bunch. And this just has all these bells and whistles. to it. This is a watch that was sold by Van Cleef and Arpels, another Parisian jeweler. But the watch was actually made by Gerald Genta, and it features a lot of exotic materials on it. So, and precious materials. So first you have 18 karat gold, which is the case, the lugs, the case back, the buckle, the hands, the crown, and the bezel. And then the top part of the case is made of tortoise shell. So you can see the tortoise shell case. And then the dial is made of wood, exotic wood that's been lacquered and printed, Van Cleef and Arpels and automatic. And it is a Frederic Piguet caliber 71. So really great movement, a movement that's found in a lot of those Blancpains, the extra flat automatics from the 80s and 90s. And the back is just stamped VCA automatic and 18K. And it's about 34 millimeters, but because of the long lugs, it wears really big. Oh, and the cabochon on the crown is tiger's eye, which is really, really a nice touch because it matches the tortoise shell as well as the wood dial. So that one is just really cool, really unique. One of these was for sale from a dealer on Instagram recently. Excuse me. Recently, and it was around 4,000 US dollars, which imagine the value that you're getting at $4,000. I mean, a solid gold watch with exotic materials like tiger's eye and wood and tortoise shell, Frederic Piguet 71 movement, as well as the rarity. Gerald Genta pieces are super rare. These high quality Van Cleef, I mean, Van Cleef and Arpels is a very high end brand. I mean, you can't get out of that store without spending $2,000 on a tiny little piece of jewelry. So, you know, what can you really go into the store and buy for $4,000 today? I mean, it's certainly going to be stainless steel. It's not going to have any gold on it. It's going to have probably an ETA or a Salida based movement. It's definitely not going to be an ultra thin automatic Frederic Piguet 71. So I think these, I mean, they're like a steal. So for what it is an amazing, amazing watch and super unique look. You know, you wear this watch and I mean, if you know somebody's going to notice it, they're going to say, "Wow, what a really cool kind of funky watch." But here's what it looks like on the wrist. I mean, it's just so cool. So yeah, that's the 5 watches that I brought along with the Abercrombie chronograph that I'm wearing.
Really cool. I
Uh,
really like this last piece as well because it like, especially when you have a lot of dress watches, and I literally only have one dive watch. Besides that, only dress watches. I think these unique looks, especially if you collect dress watches, what you're looking for at some point, because you can only have, at least that's my experience. For some people, it's different. My experience, you can only have so many watches that look almost the same. So I think this is nice to shake things up as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And I did bring one more bonus piece that's not a wristwatch because I collect pocket watches, clocks. I like purse watches a lot. And this one was just sitting on my desk. This is an old pocket watch. You can see how thin it is. It's extremely thin. It's solid 18 karat gold. And you can pop it open here. You can take a look inside, and you can see this beautiful guilloche in the center with Breguet numerals. Um, and it's a very early piece. And this was made by Movado. And it was made for a retailer in Cuba. And just a very, very cool piece. I love the The gold guilloche, actually, it's on the center of the dial as well as the middle of the dial, and that is solid gold.
Wow.
The guilloche here as well as the outer track. Time only piece, and just really cool. A lot of value in these things. I mean, you can buy some of these gold pocket watches for not much more than melt value. And I think it's a really good, really great value because they're so cool, cool to collect, cool to have, cool to examine. Um,
I agree.
and, uh, and yeah, so I don't know. I see a lot of value in some other stuff. The purse watches I absolutely love. Not really big on pocket watches, but this one, it just spoke to me. So I picked it up. But yeah, that's everything I brought today to share. Hopefully, cool stuff that people haven't seen before, and um, I'll send you some high resolution photos of them so that you can maybe share those in the over top of the video,
I will.
um, so people can see some of the details because there's a lot of nuance and a lot of really cool details in some of these pieces.
It's really amazing to talk about these watches and see also the unique pieces you brought. That's what I love about watches. Everybody has their own heart into it. You can bring very cool stuff, and for sure you are like very much doing your own thing, and I appreciate that. So really, I want to thank you. And is there anything else you would like to say to our viewers?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely like to say, you know, buy what you like. Don't be so scared. Life is all about taking risks, and you'll never really know what you love or what your style is unless you let your heart guide you, right? It's good to use your brain too, but sometimes I think we we overthink
Hmm.
when we collect. And even if you make a mistake, it's part of your learning process. It's part of your journey. And so don't be so scared to make a mistake. If something is speaking to you and it doesn't have to happen to be the most popular thing and nobody else is looking at it, I would encourage you that that's all the more reason to go for it. Um, and that's kind of the one thing that I would tell everybody, because I get a lot of messages all the time, every day. Um, wow, Kevin, like you have such a good eye, you have such good taste, and blah blah blah. I think that you probably have good eyes too, but you're scared to follow your heart. And I just wasn't. And um I would just say that's the one thing that I would kind of say to people is don't be scared to take a shot, because you might fall in love, and then you know you have something that's all your own until everybody else comes in and ruins it. but but no, seriously, I think that needs to be I think that needs to be said more, because there is one side of the argument that's like, overthink everything. Make sure it's unpolished. Make sure it's all original. Make sure that you loop the dial. And if that were the case, you know, maybe I wouldn't have bought this Movado. You know, because the dial isn't perfect, or maybe I wouldn't have bought this Boucheron, because who the hell knows what Boucheron is, or you know, maybe I wouldn't have bought this Van Cleef, um, because who's ever going to want to buy this thing? Like, I'm stuck with it probably, right? I'm happy being if that's my consequence, that I'm stuck with something like this. Or I mean, I could think of worse things. This is a sick watch to have. So yeah, I don't know. I just think that's I don't know. That's something that's not really promoted enough, to to follow your heart. And if you have an instinct, there's a reason for it. Also, one more thing, just embrace your lane. You know, we're all in different uh times of our lives, right? We're all in a different place than the next person. And so just because your grail is out of your price range doesn't mean that you need to only go for that grail. You got to start somewhere. You know what I mean? Like I said, I started with a quartz Movado, you know. I moved on to an Omega Seamaster, 300, like a James Bond one, you know. You don't have to start up here. On some there's a compelling case to be made that it's better to start in your lane, because then you gain experience to get here, and you'll get there eventually. But if you're not owning, experiencing watches throughout the journey, I think that you're losing out a little bit. And I see a lot of people trying to kind of like fake it till they make it type thing. And I think that's sad, because there's really great watches in your price range. I promise you there are. I mean, those Blanc Pons are a good example. Like, anybody can save up for a couple months and buy a Villeray, you know? Um, so there's really like no reason for it. So those are the two things that I would kind of part with, is that, you know, just because something isn't popular or appreciated now doesn't mean that it won't be in the future. And even if it's not, there's good aspects to that too, because it means that you can buy more of them for cheap if you really love them. So
That's how I look at it as well. It's but I really want to thank you. I think you're speaking from the heart, and I agree. There's not only wisdom in that for watch collecting. I think more in general for life as well. To try to be where you are, be appreciative of it, and enjoy what the road brings you of life. I think, instead of only focusing on the finish line, because from my experience, when you, let's say, reach a grill, and also talking to other people, there's a new grill. There's no such. I don't believe there's one grill watch or one only point in life. I think you just have to enjoy what's out there for you.
absolutely. I mean, as human beings, we always want what we can't have, right? I mean, it's part of our condition. So, um, if you really are enthusiastic about watches and really love watches, then, you know, the best thing to do is actually experience watches. Um, you know, meet a local watchmaker, you know, get some watches serviced, have them open them up, learn a little bit about them, because it can take you in a totally different direction that you never would have found otherwise, you know? And so I think that's you know, just part of life, you know. And yeah, thanks for having me on here, man, and you know, inviting me to kind of share some pieces and ramble about, you know, these things, because I enjoy it, and it was definitely a pleasure.
My pleasure as well. I really appreciate the time you took, and it was really enjoyable to like hear a very unique perspective, unique pieces. I think that's what I like, to see a lot of different things from what you don't hear normally. So I really want to thank you, and I also, of course, want to thank our listeners and viewers for listening to the conversation. If you can always check your Instagram. Maybe you can share your Instagram one more time, and people can maybe follow you as well.
Yeah, my Instagram is at they did. So it's all one word. It's at THEYDID.
Great. And for people that want to check out like Renaissance watches, you can find us on Instagram, also on our website, and of course on YouTube. So thank you so much, and I wish everybody a great day. And see you at the next Watch Talk.
All right, take care.
Thank you.